It was supposed to be an ordinary day, a day where she could enjoy her own company, a cup of coffee, and the breeze in the park. But life had other plans. Our story begins with Sheila, a confident, vibrant woman. With her curvy figure and deep brown skin, she radiated self-love and pride. She wore her natural hair in bold curls that seemed to dance with her every step. But today, in the middle of her routine walk, something shifted, something dark and hostile. Sheila had always known that not everyone saw the world as she did. There were people out there who, blinded by their ignorance, couldn't see past her size or her skin color. But she never let it get to her. She was strong, and not just physically. Her mind was her greatest armor. Yet, even the toughest armor can be tested. As she strolled down a quiet street on the outskirts of town, her thoughts drifted to her husband, Marcus. Marcus was away on another one of his business trips. At least that's what he always called them. In reality, he was much more than just a businessman. He was one of the most feared Marines in the country, a man who had seen war, chaos, and destruction in ways most could never imagine. But to Sheila, he was simply her loving husband, a gentle giant with a heart of gold. Suddenly, the low rumble of motorcycles filled the air, breaking her peaceful moment. At first, Sheila paid no attention to it. Bikers often pass through this area, and they usually minded their own business. But this time, something was different. The noise grew louder, closer. She glanced over her shoulder and saw them. 3 men on motorcycles, all clad in leather, their faces twisted with cruel smirks. They were headed straight for her. Sheila's heart raced, but she kept walking, hoping they would pass by. Maybe they were just rowdy. Maybe it was all in her head. But as the motorcycles slowed down and started circling her, she knew this wasn't going to be a simple drive-by. "Hey, look at this one," one of the men sneered. His voice was filled with venom. "What's a fat pig like you doing out here?" Sheila's stomach churned, but she refused to let fear show on her face. She had dealt with ignorant people before, though none quite like this. These men weren't just spewing insults. They carried an air of threat, a danger she could feel in her bones. The second man, his beard tangled and greasy, laughed cruelly. "What? You think you're too good for us? With your fancy hair and that big old body of yours?" Sheila's grip tightened on her phone. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, but she took a deep breath. Her mind was racing. Should she run? Should she speak up? Or would either of those choices make things worse? They were surrounding her now, circling like vultures around prey. Her heart pounded in her chest as the third man, younger but no less dangerous looking, revved his engine and spat on the ground near her feet. "Bet you've never had real men look your way, huh?" His eyes gleamed with malice. Sheila's jaw clenched. She was scared, but she wasn't going to let them break her. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice firm, even though her legs felt weak. "And I don't need your approval." The bikers laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that made her skin crawl. She knew she needed to get out of there, but there was no way she could outrun them. Her mind screamed for her to do something, anything, but she felt paralyzed, trapped in the moment. Just as the situation seemed like it was about to spiral out of control, something caught Sheila's eye in the distance. A black SUV had pulled onto the street, and the figure stepping out of it made her heart skip a beat. It was Marcus. He was back. Sheila's pulse quickened, but not with fear this time. With hope. Marcus wasn't just her husband. He was a man trained to handle situations far more dangerous than this. And while these bikers may have thought they were in control, they had no idea who they were about to face. The bikers hadn't noticed him. Yet, they were still focused on Sheila. their taunts becoming more vile, more threatening, but Marcus was moving swiftly and silently. His face unreadable, his steps deliberate. His combat training had taught him to assess a situation quickly, to stay calm in the face of chaos. And right now, he was sizing up the bikers. 3 men who, in a matter of moments, would realize they had made the worst mistake of their lives. Sheila's heart swelled with relief. She knew Marcus would handle this, but she couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would these men back down when they saw him? Or would they push their luck, not realizing the kind of man they were dealing with? As Marcus approached, Sheila could feel the tension building in the air. The bikers, still unaware of what was coming, were laughing amongst themselves, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. And then, without a word, Marcus stepped into the circle. Time seemed to freeze as he locked eyes with the leader of the group, the one who had started the insults. The biker's grin faltered, his bravado slipping for just a moment as he registered. The cold, intense stare coming from this man who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice low but full of authority. It wasn't a question, it was a warning. The bikers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to make of this sudden change in the situation. They had no idea who Marcus was, no clue that he had spent years on battlefields, far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. They didn't know that Marcus had earned his reputation as one of the most feared Marines, a man who never backed down, especially not when it came to protecting the people he loved. And now, standing between Sheila and these men, Marcus was ready to show them just how big of a mistake they had made. The air was thick with tension, the bikers hesitating as Marcus stood tall and unwavering. Sheila watched, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that this was far from over. What would happen next? Would the bikers back down, or would they dare to challenge the one man they should never have crossed? The answer was about to unfold. Marcus stood tall, his eyes locked onto the leader of the bikers, who was beginning to sense that things had taken a sharp turn. The smirks faded from their faces as they sized him up. Marcus wasn't just any man. His broad shoulders, the hardened look in his eyes, the way he carried himself, it all screamed that he was someone not to be messed with. But the bikers didn't know the full story yet. Sheila glanced between her husband and the bikers, her heart still racing. She had seen Marcus in action before. Not like this, but she knew what he was capable of. He was trained for moments like these, situations that could spiral into violence, where the wrong move could have devastating consequences. But Marcus always stayed calm, always in control. The leader of the bikers, still trying to hold on to his tough guy persona, stepped forward. "This your girl," he sneered, nodding toward Sheila. "You gonna let her mouth off like that?" Marcus didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying intensity that made it clear he wasn't playing games. "You're going to walk away now," he said simply, "and you're going to do it before this gets any worse for you." The biker leader chuckled nervously, glancing back at his buddies, as if for reassurance. But none of them laughed. They were starting to realize that the man standing before them wasn't someone they could intimidate. Still, pride was a dangerous thing, and the leader wasn't ready to back down completely. "You think you can just come in here and—" Before he could finish, Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. He didn't touch the man, but the sheer force of his presence made the bikers stumble back. Marcus's eyes bore into him, unblinking, unwavering. "I don't think," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. "I know, you're leaving, now." The leader's bravado cracked. He mumbled something under his breath, and with a nod to his companions, He turned toward his bike. The others followed, their confidence evaporating in the face of a man who had seen far worse than they ever would. They revved their engines, but the sound of their motorcycles had lost all its menace. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only the dust from their tires in the air. Sheila let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. As soon as the bikers were out of sight, he gently placed his hands on her shoulders, searching her eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tender now. She nodded, though her heart was still racing. "I'm fine. I was just..." Marcus pulled her into a tight embrace before she could finish. His strong arms wrapped around her, and for a moment, all the fear and tension melted away. She felt safe, like nothing in the world could harm her as long as he was there. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," Marcus whispered into her ear. Sheila pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "You're here now. That's all that matters." For a while they stood in silence, the gravity of what had just happened settling in. But as the adrenaline started to fade, Sheila couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. Those men didn't seem like the type to let something like this go, especially after being humiliated in front of each other. Marcus sensed her worry. "I know what you're thinking," he said, rubbing her back. "But they won't be coming back. Trust me." Sheila wanted to believe him, but deep down, something told her this wasn't over. The days that followed were quieter. Sheila went back to her routine, trying to push the encounter out of her mind. But it wasn't easy. Every time she walked past the spot where the bikers had cornered her, she felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting them to return. Meanwhile, Marcus had his own demons to face. He had spent years in the Marines, facing threats far more dangerous than a few bikers. But there was something about this situation that gnawed at him. It wasn't the bikers themselves. They were nothing compared to what he had seen in war. It was the fact that they had targeted Sheila, the woman he loved more than anything in the world. The thought of her being in danger while he was away made his blood boil. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Sheila finally broke the silence. "You think they'll come back, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "If they do, I'll be ready." Sheila frowned. "I don't want this to turn into something ugly, Marcus." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "I don't either, but if they try to hurt you again, they'll regret it." That night, Sheila had trouble sleeping. Her mind kept replaying the encounter with the bikers, and no matter how hard she tried to shake it, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something worse was coming. Her instincts weren't wrong. A week later, Marcus got a call that made his stomach drop. One of his old Marine buddies had been keeping an eye on the local biker gangs, and word had spread that the men Marcus had confronted weren't just any random bikers. They were part of a larger, more dangerous group, known for their violent tendencies. And now they had a target on Marcus and Sheila. The news sent a jolt of fear through Marcus, but it also reignited the fire inside him. He wasn't going to let anything happen to Sheila. He had faced worse threats, and he wasn't about to back down now. As the days passed, the tension grew. Marcus began preparing, making sure their home was secure, keeping a close eye on Sheila's whenever she went out. But despite his efforts, the sense of dread loomed over them. Then, one night, everything came to a head. It started with a sound outside, barely audible at first, but enough to make Marcus sit up in bed. He grabbed his phone, checking the security cameras he had installed around the house. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The bikers were back, and this time, they weren't alone. Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw clenched tight. The bikers hadn't just come back. They had brought backup. There were at least 7 of them now, all gathered outside the house, their faces masked by the shadows. But their intentions clear. They weren't here for another round of taunts. They were looking for revenge, and they weren't planning to leave empty-handed. Sheila, sensing the shift in the air, sat up beside Marcus, her heart pounding. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're here," Marcus replied, his voice calm but laced with a quiet fury. He slipped out of bed and moved quickly to the closet, pulling out a small lockbox. Sheila's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a handgun inside. He had never needed to use it before, but tonight was different. "Stay here," Marcus said, firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm going to handle this." Sheila's throat tightened, fear gnawing at her insides. "Marcus, please, don't do anything reckless. Just call the police. Let them handle it." But Marcus knew these men wouldn't wait for the police to arrive. And if they tried to get inside before help came, he couldn't risk what might happen. "I'll be fine," he assured her, though the tension in his voice said otherwise. "Trust me." He grabbed the gun, checked the safety, and moved toward the front door. As he stepped outside, he could feel the cold night air on his skin, but it did nothing to cool the heat boiling inside him. His eyes scanned the group of bikers who stood by their motorcycles, engines rumbling low. The leader, now wearing a skull-emblazoned jacket, grinned as Marcus emerged. "So, the tough guy finally comes out to play." The leader sneered, his voice thick with arrogance. "You embarrassed us in front of my crew. Now it's time for payback." Marcus remained calm, his grip steady on the gun. "You've made your point," he said, his voice steady. "Now turn around and leave. This ends tonight." But the leader wasn't backing down. He gestured to the men surrounding him, each of them eyeing Marcus with a mix of anticipation and aggression. "You think you can scare us off with that little toy? We're not going anywhere." The tension was palpable, thick in the air, like a storm about to break. Marcus could feel his pulse quicken, but he kept his focus. He had been in situations far worse than this, in places far more dangerous. He knew how to handle himself, but here, in front of his home, with Sheila just inside, this felt more personal than anything he'd ever faced. Before Marcus could speak, again, the leader took a step forward, pulling a knife from his belt. "Let's see how tough you are without that gun," he taunted, the blade gleaming under the streetlight. Marcus's mind raced, calculating his next move. He didn't want this to end in violence, but he wasn't about to let these men threaten his family. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "This is your last warning," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "Walk away." For a moment, it seemed like the leader might reconsider, the weight of Marcus's words hanging in the air. But then, with a sneer, he lunged forward, knife raised. In a split second, Marcus reacted. With precision and control, he sidestepped the attack, knocking the knife from the man's hand with a swift motion. The gun remained in his grip, but he didn't fire. He didn't need to. The leader stumbled back, shocked by how quickly he had been disarmed. The other bikers hesitated, unsure whether to charge or retreat. Marcus stood tall, his eyes burning with the intensity of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "I've already beaten you once," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "Don't make me do it again." The leader, now visibly shaken, scrambled to his feet, his bravado crumbling. He shot a look at his crew, who were now looking far less confident than they had moments ago. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, spitting on the ground as he backed away. One by one, the bikers mounted their motorcycles, revving their engines. They peeled off into the night, the sound of their engines fading into the distance, until only the quiet of the neighborhood remained. Marcus stood still for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He listened carefully, making sure they were really gone. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back toward the house. Inside, Sheila had been watching through the window, her heart racing as she witnessed the confrontation unfold. When Marcus walked back in, the relief on her face was undeniable. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "You're okay," she whispered, burying her face in his chest. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, gently stroking her hair. "It's over now." But even as he said the words, Marcus knew that something had changed. He had always been protective of Sheila, but after tonight, he realized just how fragile safety could be. These men had been willing to cross lines he hadn't thought possible, and while he had dealt with them tonight, there would always be others out there. People who would try to tear down what he had built with Sheila. As they stood together in the quiet of their home, Marcus tightened his grip around her, silently, vowing to protect her no matter what. Sheila pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a soft smile. "Thank you for keeping me safe," she said, her voice full of love and gratitude. Marcus smiled, brushing a stray curl from her face. "I'll always keep you safe," he promised. And in that moment, despite the chaos of the night, they found peace. The threats from outside had come and gone, but their bond, stronger now than ever, remained unshaken. Together, they knew they could face whatever challenges the world threw their way. As the night drew to a close, they settled back into their life, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The strength they found in each other was all they needed to push forward, leaving behind the fear and looking toward the future with hope. The storm had passed, but their love, their resilience, would carry them through whatever lay ahead.